Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Schwartz Report. I have been watching what's happening in the news. Maybe you have too. And what I see is something rather scary. I see democracy on the decline. Look at this chart. You can see this. The number of democracies in the world is shrinking. In the United States, if you look at this book that the Republican Party has put out, Project 2025, you actually look at it, it's quite scary because it describes a country that they would like to create that has nothing to do with the democracy that you and I grew up in. This is a book about creating an authoritarian system of governance in the United States, of eliminating things like the Department of Education, of the EPA. It's a book that lays out how the United States becomes a Christo-fascist authoritarian government ruled by Donald Trump. It's scary. Seriously. You read this book, do a Google, get some of the high points on it. It's quite scary. But what really prompted me to do this week's podcast was something that happened that I could hardly believe. The National Fraternal Order of Police proudly chose to support Donald Trump for president. Now, this is about 700,000 policemen. They enforce the laws, and they have chosen to support a man who is a convicted rapist, sexual molester. Multiple women have come forward, who's a convicted felon, multiple felonies, who I think, based on the Constitution, is a traitor, tried to overthrow the government, the Constitution. Now, what's going on that not just in the United States, but in countries all over the world? You see it in Hungary, you see it in Turkey, you can see a right wing emerging in Germany. You see it in France. You see it everywhere. Why are people, after decades of believing and supporting democracies, shifting to try to create authoritarianism? The answer is because they're afraid. Something is causing fear in humanity all over the world. A kind of unconscious gut feeling, a precognition, we call it in research, that something is happening or going to happen that is dreadful, harmful, scary. Now, could that possibly be with what's causing all this? Well, as I thought about it, it put me in mind of a research project begun by a good friend of mine, Roger Nelson. Roger created something called the Global Consciousness Project several decades ago. I consider Roger to be one of the most important consciousness researchers alive today. Roger was part of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group that explored consciousness in a number of different ways, but particularly focused on the non-local aspect of consciousness that I've been telling you about. And one of the experiments that they did was to see if individuals could focus on things called random number generators and cause them to become non-random. And they could. And this has been replicated over and over in laboratories all over the world. Individuals can focus their intentioned awareness on a random number generator. Random number generators are little gadgets that produce random numbers. That's the whole point. And yet, it has been shown that individuals can, when they focus intentioned awareness on the random number generators, can make them non-random. Now, as I thought about that and thought about Roger's project, Roger asked the question, as I said, it's several decades ago, what happens when a whole bunch of people focus on something that has a high emotional content, particularly? What happens then? So he put little random number generators all over the world with friends, and they run 24/7. And what he discovered is that when something happens that focuses coherent consciousness of many people, that these little random number generators spread all over the world go non-random. Things like Princess Diana's death, Nelson Mandela's death or his funeral, the event at Fukushima. Things which focus attention, even though people don't really say, oh, well, that's what I'm thinking about or focused on, but that they do focus on, that these coherent consciousness events create order in subtle ways in the world, because we are all linked together, as I have talked about in a number of the podcasts that I've done. We see in science that consciousness is causal and fundamental, and that all consciousness is interlinked and interdependent. And what Roger's project has been doing is measuring that. And the results are very clear. You look at this chart. The blue line is what you'd expect randomly, and the red is what you actually see. Now, can that possibly be true? Can people actually make these little random number generators go non-random? Does coherent consciousness really change society? And the answer is, from a completely different discipline, yes. A study done by the Social Cognitive Network Academic Research Center at Rensselaer Polytech Institute provided confirmation of this. exactly the kind of thing that Roger was showing with his random number generators. The Cognitive Network Academic Research Center at Rensselaer discovered that to change the beliefs of an entire community, only 10% of the population needs to become convinced of a new or different opinion. At that tipping point, the idea can spread through social networks and alter behaviors on a large scale. You can see it. That's what's happening. We can look at the news every day and see a large number of us are clearly frightened about something. It gets discussed in the media as racism, and it is that. It gets discussed as genderism, and it is that. There are a lot of different aspects to it, but what it really is, I want to suggest to you, is a precognition of something that is occurring and coming that is fearful and is scary and is causing a change in not only our society, but societies all over the world. That's why democracies in many countries are decreasing, why authoritarianism is on the rise. Because when people get frightened, they want somebody to come forward and say, I'm an authority, I know how to fix this, I'm going to fix it, you don't need to be worried about it, I'll take care of it. Just the kind of thing you hear being said in our election. I'm going to take care of it. I know how to fix it. But the choices that are being proposed by authoritarians don't lead to good outcomes. They lead to the destruction of democracy. You'll notice that in the Project 2025, they don't talk at all about climate change. And yet, any research scientist who's bothered to look into this, even superficially, knows that climate change is affecting our society in immeasurable ways. Sea rise is going to destroy coastal areas. It's already getting to a point, for instance, in Florida, where you can't get home insurance because insurance companies don't want to insure houses that are likely to be submerged or destroyed by water or hurricanes. Same thing is happening in California, but for a completely different reason. In that case, it's fire. These huge fires, burning towns. Insurance companies don't want to insure it, so their people are not being able to get insurance. And on and on. You just think about it. You read about it almost every day in the news. You hear about it. Things are happening as a result of what climate change is doing, and they're causing great fear. And I believe that what is driving these changes in our culture are the precognition of what's happening, what's going to happen to you, your children, your grandchildren. So what are we going to do? We're going to give in? Going to become authoritarians? That's what we're going to decide in November. But I want to suggest to you there is another way to go entirely. I call it the strategy of beingness. I've been doing research on social transformation for almost 30 years. And what I see over and over is that something I call the quotidian choice, when that comes into play, people change culture in ways that foster well-being. The secret that lies at the heart of nonviolent social transformation is based on beingness, expressed through the quotidian choice. Quotidian is a funny little word people don't use much. It means daily, ordinary, mundane. And what I'm talking about is that we make choices all the time. We hardly even think about it. We buy the toothpaste our mother started us with. We buy some other product that somebody in school got us started with. You don't even think about it. You just go and do that. What you have to do is become conscious of what you're doing. The strategy of beingness is very simple. It's usually a small moment of decision in which the options available vary in their implications, and one is the most compassionate and life-affirming, and that's the one you pick. You just have to become awake. You have to become aware of what you're doing and the choices that you're making. So here's how to do it. First, you become aware you're making a choice. You went into the grocery store and you walk down the aisles and you realize you're making choices. So you choose things which foster well-being. You choose the compassionate, life-affirming one as you understand it at that moment. Your understanding may change, but your intention is to do that which is compassionate and life-affirming and fostering of well-being. So none of the choices may be great, but one is always slightly more compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of well-being than the others. That's it. You do this, you tell your family you're doing it and get them to do it. You ask your friends to do it. You ask them to ask their friends to do it. And as the Rensselaer research showed, when 10% of us shift in consciousness, the whole culture changes to accommodate that. So we have this precognition of a future which is in crisis. And we have a choice. We're either going to go down that road, authoritarianism, catastrophe after catastrophe from climate change, or we're going to choose new technologies, new ways, new things to do. We're going to be supportive of well-being at every level. And if we'll do that, then things will change. And this precognition that is driving humanity all over the world will alter. It's not fixed. If you want to know more about this, get a copy of my book, The 8 Laws of Change, How to Be an Agent of Personal and Social Transformation. Won the Nautilus Award. I really think this is important, and I hope that you will decide to join me in making choices, little choices, choices that you wouldn't think would affect anybody else, but when lots of people do them, they make a big difference. Because if we do that, we don't have to have the future we are precognizing now of crisis and authoritarianism and disaster. And as long as I'm talking about this, I'd like to ask you to give me a hand. I need some help here. I've been doing these podcasts now for a year. They take a lot of time. They're expensive. could use some help on this. And I would ask you, and you'll see where to do it at the end of the podcast, make a little contribution to keep this going. If you find it useful, the information helpful, it would help me to know that. And I appreciate it. And thank you. And I hope whatever you do, that you do start making choices that are compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of well-being in every way you can. Thank you.